The Rebbe Zilgazunzheim began the Farbrengen this afternoon that they are really a combination of many inyanim in this Shabbos. And actually we find many inyanim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in the world that are very similar, but at the same time each one of them has to be different and possess something different within itself. Because being that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates everything for a reason, Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamai lo yibara ela l'chvaydo, as the Mishnah tells us. Everything which Hashem created in this world was created to honor Him, to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, we cannot say that they are two identical inyanim repeated. We must say that every inyan which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created every inyan has its maila, has its plus. The same applies when we have a gathering of people, which this is the whole idea what a Farbrengen is. A Farbrengen is not one person getting together. The word hisvadus, which means Farbrengen, this in itself spells out that a Farbrengen is the idea, a gathering of many people. And again, people that each one of them excels in different ways than the other. Same thing is Benegeya this Shabbos. This Shabbos has many inyanim within the Shabbos, the Rebbe says. It is Shabbos Pashas Mishpatim. It is Shabbos Pashas Shkolim. It is the Shabbos that we bless the Chodesh of Adar. And it is also the date of Chav Hei Shvat, which actually these inyanim are separate inyanim one from another. They are not bound one with another. Shabbos Mevachim Shvat mustn't necessarily be Shabbos Shkolim, because we could have Shabbos Shkolim when Rosh Chodesh Adar should fall out on Shabbos. Then Shabbos Shkolim will be on Rosh Chodesh Adar when it is on Shabbos. And Shabbos Mevachim Shvat is not Pasha Shkolim. Again, it is not necessarily that it should be Pashas Mishpatim and Shabbos Mevachim mustn't necessarily come together. Shabbos Mevachim Adar Taka has to be at the end of Shvat, but it mustn't necessarily be on this day, on the 25th day of Shvat. So actually, each of these inyanim are really separate inyanim. So the question arises, which of these inyanim should be discussed first? We know there are klolim, look up many inyanim. There's a klal of tadir, ushe'einei tadir, tadir kaida, which means if there's an inyan which comes constantly, and there's an inyan which is an unusual one, we give preference to the inyan which comes constantly. We know another klal. There's a klal of tadir umikudish. There are inyanim that come constantly. There's inyanim that are rare, but at the same time, these inyanim that are rare may be holier, may possess more kedusha within themselves than the constant inyanim. Then halacha tells us we give preference to the inyanim that are more kaddish. So what the Rebbe is trying to prove is that there is such a shaila, which of the inyanim should really get preference when we want to discuss today's Shabbos, because there are many inyanim to discuss regarding today's Shabbos. B'negeya Pasha Shkolim, we find an interesting chazal. Shkolim actually means that each one of the Yidden was to contribute a half a shekel. And this half shekel was a kofer nefesh. This brought forgiveness on the Chet HaEgel. So the Medrash tells us that Niskashe Moshe had hardships. Moshe couldn't understand how is it possible that a machzis ha-shekel, a half shekel, a coin, which is merely a contribution of money, should bring about a kapara, a forgiveness for such a serious chet, for such a serious sin as the Chet HaEgel. And Moshe didn't understand. And the Chazal continue that what the Rabbeinu Shalom did was Heraloi matbeya shel eish. He showed Moshe Rabbeinu a coin of fire. And by showing Moshe the coin of fire, this is what calmed Moshe. And Moshe agreed that he can already understand that the Machtis HaShekel can accomplish a slicha, a kapara, a forgiveness on the Chet. So Rabbi asked, this medrash really needs an understanding. First of all, we know that tzedakah taka brings out forgiveness. So Rabbi used the expression, any magid in any shtetl, olden days used to be magidim in the shtetlach, would not have a hard time to explain how by contributing for tzedakah this brings about forgiveness. So here we say that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand how is it that the Machzis HaShekel poils a kapara. And what happened later? HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him Matbeya Shalish. And by HaKadosh Baruch Hu showing him the coin of fire, this calmed Moshe, and Moshe already realized that it could bring a kapara. What happened before and what happened after? And as the Rebbe explained, B'chlal the inyan of Mammon, we know there's a taivas Mammon. People have a thirst, a hunger to money. And this is not one of the finest inyanim that exist in this world, the inner drive which people have to money. On the contrary, it's considered one of the lower taivas when we're talking about taivas Mammon. And at the same time, Chazal tell us, based on the pasuk as Kol Hayikum Asher Beragleim, we read the pasuk in Chumash Bereishis. Chazal comment, Zema Moinei Shel Odom, Shema Midoi Al Raglov, that money of a person, money is so important to a person that it's considered Ma'amidai Al Raglov, it puts him on his feet. That's what the Chazal tell us. So what Moshe couldn't understand was, how is it that such a gashmiistic thing as money, it's like the basis of the person's existence, but at the same time it's a low gashmiistic taiva when we're talking about taivas Mammon. How is it that a Machzis HaShekel of a matbeya, of a gashmiistic matbeya, can have an effect that this should accomplish such great spiritual inyanim? This is what Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't realize. Chazal continue. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, Zeh yitnu, this is what they should give, and this is what Chazal comment, Heraloi matbeya shalish. Zeh, meaning, Zeh is an expression of gilui, pointing at something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu pointed at the matbeya shalish and told them, this is what Yidden are giving. In other words, the Rebbe is explaining, the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe, what Yidden are giving is not a mere gashmi is the giveaway. A mere gashmi is the thing, an inyan of mammon, which is a low-end gashmi is the kazach. What Yidden are giving, when a Yid is contributing a matbeya gashmis, a matbeya of kesef v'zahav, what he's really doing, he's giving something which it's in source, it's very, very high. And it's a matbeya shalish. And this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom is telling him, Zayitnu. When they are giving, though the Yid is not giving a matbeya shalish, the Yid is giving a gashmi isdik matbeya. It comes no closeness to fire in any way. It's nothing spiritual. It's something which is a gashmi isdik matbeya. So the Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, no. To him, this is so dear, and it can accomplish that much, that Zayitnu. When the Yidden are giving it, I am looking at it not Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, not like it's a gashmi istik ezach, a grobe gashmi istik ezach, which is far, far and low end of gashmi is. On the contrary, it's a real high spiritual thing, and as the Rebbe explained the whole, we find the Chassidus stresses there are 4 yisoidas, 4 fundamentals, and one of them is the yisoida eish. And as the Rebbe tells us in Tanya, the nature of yisoida eish is that eish goes milmato lamayla. Eish by nature goes from bottom up. The same thing the Rebbe says, this giveaway which Yidden are giving, this contribution which Yidden are making, this is something I view it as an inyan of Eish. This is something which is coming just like Eish has this tivius of being milmato lamayla, coming from Mata and striving up to Maila. getting closer to higher up. The same the Rebbeinu is looking as this matbeya shleish, and the Rebbeinu is saying zayitnu. This is what they are giving. They are giving something which is extremely high and spiritual to me. The Rebbeinu says, and to him it has a tremendous meaning. When the Yid goes and gives away of his gashmis the kezachen, gives of himself, gives a machzas hashekel, the Rebbeinu says to him it's very dear, to him it's very important. And this money was utilized for very high inyanim. This money was utilized for bringing karbanis. Karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash, something which is extremely chashuv by the Rabbeinu Shalom. As the Rebbe stressed the expression, what does a korban accomplish? Chazal tell us, nachas ruach lefonai shamarti v'nasa retzoini. Based on the pasuk reach nechoyach, Chazal comment that when a Yid brings a korban, it creates a feeling of satisfaction by the Rebbeinu. And again, by Chazal, every word is extremely accurate. The expression goes, nachas ruach, it causes a feeling of satisfaction by Hashem. And Chazal add in the word lefonai, sha'amarti v'nasa retzoini. Actually, the expression could have been without the word lefonai. Nachas ruach, it brings satisfaction to the Rabbeinu Shalom, sha'amarti, he commanded v'nasa retzoini, and his will was fulfilled. So the Rebbe is stressing lefonai, as Chassidus stresses, reflects the pnimius of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, it's not something which is, if we should use the expression of chitzonius and pnimius by the Eibishter, it's not something merely external by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's something which has an internal effect on the Eibishter. Nachas ruach lefonai, the Eibishter says, not stam nachas ruach. It's a real in-depth nachas ruach, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, by him, when a Yid brings a korban. And all this is accomplished through the matbeya shleish, through the matbeya which a Yid contributes, through this machzas hashekel which a Yid gives away. And again, here we see, how was the Machzas HaShekel given? It was given, every single Yid gave the same. Machzas HaShekel. Ha'ashir lo yarbe, v'hadal lo yamit. The rich man should not give more, the poor man should not give less. It brings out a certain equality, certain equalness, how we find how Yidden are every Yid, from Roshechem Shiftechem, through Choyte Vitzecha, V'Sheyev Memecha, it brings together all the Yid, and it shows us the Maila, how each and every Yid takes a Maila, gives the same contribution. Here the Rebbe says we find, furthermore, when we read this inyan in the Torah, when we read this Parsha, this Aliyah could be given to any Yid, could be given to a Pashat Yid, to a Yid who goes in the category of Lo Yoda Maika Oma. He doesn't even know, he doesn't even understand the words of the psukim, or the psukim that are read. And it could be given to somebody who is Roshechem Shiftechem, an elder and a leader. Both of them recite the same bracha and birchas HaTorah. This one makes the bracha and the other one makes the bracha. One has a tremendous and depth understanding of what's going on, and the other one doesn't begin to understand. He's lo yada ma'ikama. Still we are told he has to make the same bracha. What does all this show? It shows how each and every Yid, there's, from a certain point of view, we find something common in each and every Yid. Something, the same maila everyone possesses equally. This is Benegeya Pasha Shkolim, which Pasha Shkolim is the first of the series of the 4 Pashas which we're going to have from now till Pesach. There are 4 various Pashas. Pasha Shkolim is the first. Again, the Rebbe stressed, Pasha Shkolim is not an inyan in itself. If it comes as the first of 4, that means it's part of those weeks, of those Parshias. Interesting, the Rebbe brought out, we also find that when it comes to maftir of Pasha Shkolim, normally we recite a maftir, which is the maftir that has the contents of the maftir, usually has a shaykhas to the Sedra, which we read on that week. However, when it comes in the 4 Parshias, the contents of the maftir is not something that has a shaykhas to the Pashas HaShavua, it's something which has a shaykhas to the Shabbos. Today, for example, the contents of today's maftir deals with an inyan that has a shaykhas to Pasha Shkolim. And the same will be in the other 3 Shabbos. However, at the same time, it is Taka Pasha Shkolim, but it is also Pashas Mishpatim. Here the Rebbe brought out, the name of the Sedra is Mishpatim. If we were to touch up what Mishpatim means, this leads us that there are three categories of mitzvahs, three famous categories of mitzvahs, which we all know. That mitzvahs are divided into Eidus, Chukim, and Mishpat. This Sedra is called Pashas Mishpat. Rebbe said if we were to look through the entire Sedra, we will find that the inyanim which are discussed in this Sedra are not only inyanim which are fit into the category of Mishpatim. This Sedra discusses mitzvahs which fit into the category of Eidos and which fit into the category of Chukim. So why is the Sedra called Mishpatim? As the Rebbe always mentions, the name of the Sedra is like a key to the entire Sedra. And here we see there are many inyanim which are, it's very obvious to everyone that these are Chukim, and at the same time these inyanim are discussed here in the Sedra. Rebbe is explaining that the differences between Mishpatim and Chukim, for example. Chukim is the pshat, we are doing these mitzvahs without our own understanding. We put our own rationale, our own understanding on the side. Why are we fulfilling these mitzvahs? Because the Rebbeinu Shalom told us to do so. There's an expression from the Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah. The Rebbe quotes very often. Ilu nitztavinu lachtoich eitzim. We would do that as well. Which means, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have told us we should go out into the forest and chop wood, we would do that as well. We do whatever the Rebbe tells us. We do it not because we have an understanding, a seichel, that tells us that this is the right thing to do. We do it. We don't understand why we have to do it. We do it because HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to. Comes to Mishpatim, it's totally not the case. Mishpatim is the pshat. These are mitzvahs which the Goyim are not raising any questions on, because the Goyim also realize and understand that these mitzvahs have to be fulfilled. As there's a famous Gemara, Gemara tells us, Ilu lo nitno Torah. If Torah wouldn't have been given, but many occasions when he quotes this Gemara, always adds on that when the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Shmuel used to quote this Gemara, he always used to add on the word Chas v'Shalom. If Chas v'Shalom, Torah wouldn't have been given, the Gemara goes on saying, we would have learned we would have known to observe Mishpatim even without HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling us. So when we fulfill a Mishpat, here we do it with all our heart, with all our understanding. Our heart and mind, our seichel, and our geschmack, and our hergish is totally into this thing. Why? Because we really understand what we're doing. Now that we are doing these mishpatim, because the Rebishter told us to, so not only are we doing it with our own understanding, with our own geschmack into the thing, we are doing it also because we feel this is going to attach the one who commanded it, the mitzvah, and the one who was commanded to do it, who is the yid, the person, the nivra. As the Rebbe brought an example, somebody who is a great and outstanding scholar, a great and outstanding chacham, and this person tells me to do something. I feel that I have no shaykhs to this person. This person is by far such an outstanding scholar. What kind of erech, what kind of comparison am I to this person? However, by fulfilling his wish, this creates a contact between the person who requested the wish to be fulfilled and the one who is doing it. The same is b'negei mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, bichlal, bring to a kesher, bring to a tzafse v'chibur, as Chassidus stresses, bring to a closeness, to an attachment between the Rebbeinu Shalom and the yid who is fulfilling the mitzvah. In the mitzvah of Mishpatim, it is more obvious the fact that the person puts himself into it with a geschmack because he understands what he's doing. Here the Torah is telling us, Ve'ela mishpatim ashatosim lefneim. Comes to this week's Sedra, this Sedra contains many mitzvahs, not only Mishpatim. There are Eidos in this mitzvahs, in the Sedra, there are Chukim in the Sedra, but what is the Pshat ve'ela ha-Mishpatim? The Torah here is telling us there is a certain aspect in the mitzvahs of Mishpatim. Utilize this aspect in all the mitzvahs. This approach that you do it with much more geschmack. Why? Because you understand what you're doing. When you understand what you're doing, you're not just putting yourself totally aside and doing lach de chaitzim, going out and cutting wood. You're doing something with a real geschmack because you realize you have to do it. You realize you have to do it. You understand why you're doing it, and you're doing it with all your heart and with all your energy. The same the Rebbe says. This is why the Seder is called Mishpatim, because this koch and geschmack, which we have in Mishpatim, and we express it usually in Mishpatim much more than in other mitzvahs. Here the Torah is telling us that we have to carry over, we have to transmit this feeling that when we fulfill the other categories of mitzvahs as well. Rebbe, without another interesting point. Today is Shabbos Mevorchim Oda. What does this mean in terms of a hero, in terms of a lesson to us? Oda, the taich of Oda is adir, strong. And Meila, this is a reminder for us when we go out doing Yonim for Rabbeinu Shalom, Yonim of Torah mitzvahs. How do they have to be done? With a tremendous strength, with a koch, with a geschmack, an expression of adir, of starkheit. And this is what this month reminds us. That in Yonim of Torah and mitzvahs have to be fulfilled in a sense of adir. An extra special starkheit and koch and warmkeit. As usual in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe discusses a Rashi in this week's Sedre, and at the same time also an Inyan of the Rambam that has a Shaykhis, and you know the Rambam that has a Shaykhis to the Shia Rambam, as Rambam has learned 3 Prokim daily. But again, the Rashi in this week's Sedre, the Rebbe raised the question, and Pashas Mishpatim, this question has a shaykhis to inyanim which he had discussed in previous seders. In Pashas B'Shalach, when we read the Shira, then Rebbe discussed the pasuk of Oz nivhalu alufei edoim Eilei moyav yerchzoi meroad no moigu kol yoshvei kno. This is in Pashas B'Shalach, in Kapitel Tesvav, Pasuk Tesvav. And the Rebbe then explained at length the Rashi. Why is it that the Torah here refers to specific nations, that they got very scared, that Alufei Edom in the Eilei Moav, more than any other nation? And as the Rebbe pointed out a few weeks ago, when this was learned, 2 weeks ago, that really they were not fearing. The only thing is, they felt hurt. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu performing such great nisim for Yidden? So the Rebbe then raised the question, why did these nations feel hurt more than anyone else? There were other nations. Why only they? So the Rebbe explained that these nations had a certain closeness to Yidden, in the sense they were related to the Yidden. Edom is Esav. Edom was a cousin to the Yidden. Moav was also a close relative. Moav came out of Lot. He was a nephew to Avram. So these relatives, so-called relatives, these goyim, they were bothered. Why is the Rabbeinu Shalom doing such nisim for Yidden and not for them? Other nations weren't hurt by it that much. However, these nations, who they looked themselves, oh, these are our cousins, these are our relatives. Why for them, yes, for us not? So Rebbe then raised the question, if we're learning on this derech, why wasn't Yishmael complaining? The Plishtim are children of Yishmael. They also should have been complaining. Yishmael was a brother of Yitzchak. Or Ammon. Ammon and Moav were both descendants of Lot. Why weren't they complaining? So the Rebbe then explained 2 weeks ago the reason Ammon didn't express any jealousness, and Moav did, because we read in Parashas Chumash Bereishis that when Ammon and Moav were born, they were both born from two different daughters of Lot. Moav's mother named him Moav. What does Moav mean? Me'av. In other words, in his name it is expressed that he's a son of Lot. Ammon's mother did not publicize that her child was born from her father. And therefore, she hid it. She was ashamed. Enough, she committed this sin, but she didn't go ahead and publicize this. Therefore, here, the Rebbe says, it would be against the interests of Ammon to come and scream, we are cousins to the Yidden, and therefore we should get the same type of nisim as the Yidden are getting. Ammon did not publicize the fact that he was also a nephew of Lot, and that Ammon was born from his mother and her father. It was an embarrassment to Ammon. Ammon didn't want to publicize a thing like that. However, Moav, for whatever reason, did not hide this. Moav's mother did not possess this feeling of tznius within her. But on the contrary, she named him Moav, which spells out right away Me'av. So this was open and known to everyone that Moav is a close relative to the Yidden, because Moav is a nephew of Lot. So Moav and Edom, they were very much complaining, why is it that they were not deserving such type of nisim as the Yidden were, and therefore this aroused within them a jealousness. Because, as the Pasuk tells us, and Rashi comments, the territories, and the Rebbe explained it 2 weeks ago and today again, the territories of Edom and Moav were not taken over by the Yidden. When the Yidden entered Canaan, they took over the land of Canaan, but they did not start up neither with Moav, neither with Edom. So therefore, they had no reason to be afraid. Why were they afraid? Seeing the Rebbe is performing such great nisim to the Yidden, so why should they be hurt by it? The reason they are hurt by this because it aroused within them a certain feeling of jealousness. They couldn't fargin the Yidden. Why is it that the Yidden are getting these nisim and they not? Regarding the children of Yishmael, why weren't they bothered with it? So the Rebbe says that Chazal tell us that Yishmael did tshuva. Yishmael at his older age did tshuva. And that is why when Avram passed away and Yishmael and Yitzchak came to the Levaya of their father Avram, Yishmael gave covered respect to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak should go before him and he went behind Yitzchak. So what does this show us? It shows us that Yishmael b'soif Yamav did tshuva. So the Rebbe is saying, there was some that raised the question from Yishmael's doing tshuva. Till now, many years passed. So the descendants of Yishmael had a right to forget about Yishmael's doing tshuva. And therefore it could have aroused within them again a jealousy. True, their great-grandfather, or whatever he was to them, did tshuva, but many years passed. Here we are talking in the Midbar. When did Yishmael do tshuva? Hundreds of years ago. So maybe his children lost track that Yishmael did tshuva. And why weren't they also hurt, equally hurt, like Edom and Moav, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is performing such outstanding nisim to the Yidden only, not to anyone else? So here the Rebbe says that in learning, when we learn Shas, when we learn Gemara, there are klolei ha-Talmud, there are klolim in learning. And for some reason, the Rebbe says, these klolim are usually not told to students who are learning Gemara. How does he know that they are not told to students, the Rebbe says? Because he says when he was a student, and when he learned by his malamdim, they also never told him these klolim, these general rules. How do we approach a kasha and a teretz in the formula of learning Gemara? When did he discover it all, the Rebbe says? As he grew older. He says he started learning Masechta Brachas. Took a Masechta Brachas into his hand. The Masechta Brachas from the Vilna Shas is quite of a heavy volume. Rabbi says he started turning the pages in the back. Turns the pages in the back, he sees Klalei HaTalmud. That there's in the back of Masechta Brachos, there are klalim, there are general rules. What is a proper approach? How do we ask a kasha, and how do we build a kasha, and how do we answer a teretz, and so forth? So Rabbi says this is how he was telling this afternoon, when he got aware of this Klalei HaTalmud, he raised the question, why wasn't he told about it? When he was younger, why didn't his malamdim tell him about it? So it says, was told a few terutzim. In Gemara we always have one teretz, and a viboye saying, but there's another teretz. First of all, they told him, which lamdim ever learns Masechta Brachos? Masechta Brachos is not a lamdische Masechta. In yeshivas, he says, you learn the three bavis. There are 7 famous yeshivish Masechtas. But who learns Masechta Brachos? So who's going to bother looking in the back of Masechta Brachos? He says, you know who told him, who learns Masechta Brachos? It's made for the Ein Yankiv learners. In the olden days in Shul, they used to learn Ein Yankiv between Mincha and Ma'ariv. So the uneducated people would come, the shoemakers or the tinsmiths, they would come to Mincha, and there would be some time between Mincha and Ma'ariv, so usually they would study some Ein Yaakov. And Ein Yaakov is excerpts from Chazal that deal with Agarete, stories in Gemara. And in Masechta Brachos, there's a lot of it. So he says, they are the people that learn Masechta Brachos. But a lam, which lam learns Masechta Brachos? That was one way they explained it to him. Another way they explained it to him is go ahead and look it up yourself. And not everything has to be told to a person, to a student, to a Talmud. What he's trying to bring out is in klolim of question. There's rules, besides the rules which Gemara tells us. The Rebbe says, like Rav Shmuel, when there's a machloikas of Rav Shmuel, hilchas Rav be surah, hilchas Shmuel b'mamayne. If we're talking about an issue which is a money issue and the Choshe Mishpatim issue, the halacha is like Shmuel. If we're talking in another issue, the halacha is like Rav. These are klolim which Gemara tells us. Gemara tells us that when there are certain machloikas of Tanoim, the halacha is so and so. These klolim, klolei hashas, are different type of klolim. These give us general rules. How do we build a kasha and how do we answer a teretz? A teretz, the Rebbe says, at times we have to, when we have a strong kasha in front of us, a gzunta kasha, strong kasha, times we have to come on to such a shitta, and build such type of a picture and such type of a picture in order to answer the stroke, to get the mountain away, the mountain of the kasha away. So in other words, when we have to answer a teretz, we at times would use more remote type of things, unusual type of approaches in learning, as long as to get the kasha out of the way. To go ahead and schlep a kasha from left field in order to create a kasha, this is no derech halimut. Same thing, the Rebbe says here. We have an accepted fact that Yishmael did tshuva. And therefore it left a certain impact. Yishmael did tshuva, the other children of Avram, which he had with the Bnei Keturah, them he sent off far away. So by sending them more far away, this gave them to understand that they have no shaychus anymore with the children of Avram. But Mela, the Rebbe says, this is something which is given facts. To go and build kashas on these given facts. True, Yishmael did tshuva. Perhaps if he did tshuva, however, maybe this was forgotten by his children, and if it was forgotten, this could have aroused within his children a jealousy. This the Rebbe uses an expression. This is something what he calls. This is called spalten ahor. He uses the expression in Yiddish to take something which is as thin as a hair and go ahead and split it. This, he says, is not the right approach in the derech halimud and derech of learning. Therefore, let's leave that question aside. It's not a kasha. So we are back to interpretation that when the Yidden went into Eretz Yisrael, all they wanted to take over was the land of Canaan, and not anything else. Now let us go to this week's Seder. In Parshas Mishpatim, we read in Kapitel Chav Gimel, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Here we are discussing the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. V'shati es gvulcha, The Rebbe is promising the Yidden that he's taking them into Eretz Yisrael. V'shati is gvulcha mi Yamsuf ad Yom Plishtim u'memidbar ad Anoah. And from the Midbar until the Nahor. Which Nahor, the Pasuk doesn't say. Han-Nahor, not Nahor, Han-Nahor, the famous Nahor. So Rashi says, which is the famous Nahor? Nahar Pros. The river of Pros. This is a river which the child who's learning Chumash has learned about. Right away in Chumash Bereshis, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created the world, we read about Nahar Paros. And here we are told again about Nahar Paros. If we look weiter in Chumash Bamidbar, the end of Chumash Bamidbar, where the Torah tells us all the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, we will see that the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael did not come to Nahar Paros. The boundary of Eretz Yisrael comes to the Yarden, but not to Nahar Paros. Who are the countries who are bordering Nahar Paros? It is Esav, which is Edom, is bordering Pras, and Ammon and Moav. So why is it? Here we just read in Parshas Bishalach that the Yidden, they just got scared, not for the fact that the Yidden are going to take over their country, but only for the fact that they just couldn't give in to the fact, they resented the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was performing such outstanding nisim to the Yidden and not to them. But not that they were afraid that the Yidden are going to take away their country. That they weren't afraid of. All they knew, they constantly kept on hearing that the Yidden are entering Canaan. It was a known fact amongst the Goyim then that the Yidden are entering Canaan, but nothing else other than Canaan. Here we read in Parshas Mishpatim, 2 weeks later, we read that where will the boundary of Eretz Yisrael go to? The boundary of Eretz Yisrael will go until the Nahor. What is the Nahor? Nahar Pras. We just read that it wouldn't. So Rebbe is saying, as learning Pshat, what we read in Parshas Bishalach happened prior to Matan Torah. When did Shira happen? When did the Yidden sing the Shira? A few days after going out of Mitzrayim? Here in Parshas Mishpatim, we are already after Matan Torah. We are after Matan Torah, as we know, Ve'ela HaMishpatim. So Chazal comment, Ve'ela Meisef ala Rishonim. It becomes a continuation to Yisrael. Just like the Inyanim which were discussed in last week's Chazarah Misinai, the same thing, or everything which is discussed here is also Misinai. However, it's already after Matan Torah. The child also remembers that even in Parshas Lech Lecha we learned that when Mashiach will come, the Rebbeinu will expand the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. The boundaries of Eretz Yisrael will also include not only the 7 nations of Canaan, but also 3 additional nations. Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni. Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni, these are the nations of Edom, Ammon, and Moav. Mamela could very well be that the pasuk here, when the pasuk here is discussing the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, and saying that the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael will be going Ad Yom Plishtim, Midbar Ad Hanor, here it is talking not only regarding the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael as the boundaries were when the Yidden took over Eretz Yisrael. Here the pasuk is talking what it's going to be like when the Yidden will take over totally after Mashiach will come, and it will also include Keni, Knizi, and Kadmon. B'negeya the Rambam in this week's Sedra, Rebbe chose to learn the Rambam of tonight, Sunday, Motzei Shabbos, and that is a Rambam in the halachas of Hilchas Malva V'Loiva, the halachas of loans, lending and borrowing. In today's Sedra, in Parshas Mishpatim, we read about him Kesef Tal Ve'Asami. We read about the mitzvah of giving a loan, one Yid giving a loan to another. And also, it is customary that the Gemilas Chesed fund, Shemrei Shabbos it is called, which Rav Shimon Goldman heads, he's the Gabbai of this fund, they always make them Lava Malka on this Motzei Shabbos. So to tie it in, Motzei Shabbos of Im Kesef Talva. So that is why the Rebbe also raised the question regarding the Rambam in Hilchas Malva V'Loiva. The Rambam begins, Mitzvahs Esse Lahalvois La'Aniya Yisrael. It is a mitzvah aseh to lend money to Jewish poor. Shenema im kesef talve es ami es oni imach. Then the Rambam continues, mitzvah zug doila min tzedakah ela oni hashoyel. This mitzvah of giving alone is a yet greater mitzvah than tzedakah. Why? Shezeh kvar nitzrach lishoyel, v'zeh adayin lo higia lemida zu. Interesting. This one, the one who's asking for tzedakah, he already made peace with the fact that he has to come out for tzedakah and ask for tzedakah. The one who's asking for a loan, he's asking for a loan, but for tzedakah he wouldn't ask. So that is why the Rambam says, this is a bigger mitzvah than tzedakah. The emphasis, it's a Gemara. Gemara tells us, G'dolam gemilas chesed, yoiser min tzedakah. Why, Gemara says? Gemara says, tzedakah is only for the poor. However, gemilas chesadim is bein la'aniyim or bein la'ashir. So what do we see? That gemilas chesed is for all, for poor and for rich. What does the Rambam say? Mitzvah saseh, it's a mitzvah saseh lahalvis to lend to whom? La'aniyah Yisrael, to the poor of Yidden. What's about the rich? If a rich person needs a loan, same mitzvah to give him as well. This the Rambam doesn't mention. Why does the Rambam stress mitzvah saseh lahalvis la'aniyah Yisrael? It's a mitzvah saseh to give not to an ani as well. As we just mentioned, the Gemara tells us, G'daylog gemilas chasadim yoisam min tzedakah. Why? Because tzedakah is only la'aniyim as opposed to gemilas chasadim, which is la'aniyim and la'ashirim. If we were to look in the Rambam, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, where the Rambam discusses this mitzvah, we will find it a little different. Shetzivanu lahalvis lani, we are commanded to lend to a poor person lahakil ma'anyay, to make it easier in his yoke of poverty, or laharchiv loyin, to make it broader on him. V'zeh mitzvah ayoyse chazaka v'yoyse mechuyeves mikol mitzvah tzedakah. Now here the Rambam says, Kimishan is galav in his baza lishel miyada anoshim, one who has already gone through the shame of asking for tzedakah, ain't tzaras anyoy. His poverty is not as kemoitzaras hamistater, as the one who is hiding. Sheyirtze lehiyazer, he wants to be helped, but he doesn't want it should be revealed that he's poor. So the Rambam here is explaining it a little more, why the greatness of mitzvah tzedakah, of mitzvah chasadim, or the mitzvah of gemilas chasadim, is to everyone. And at the same time, he keeps on stressing that the mitzvah is lahalvis la'ani, to lend to the poor. And this is something which requires an interpretation. The Rebbe left as a question. This is something which has to be explained. Why Taka the Rambam stresses the mitzvah only to lend to an ani? True, it could be learned that there's a concept of that he's an ani ba'isa shah. At that time, when he has to come on to the loan, he's considered poor. But again, why does the Rambam have to stress it la'aniyeh Yisrael? The Gemara, when the Gemara explains the importance of giving a gemilas chesed, the Gemara uses the expression gemilas chesed is great. Why? Because it is bein la'aniyim or bein la'ashirim. It's for the poor as well as for the wealthy. At times we have a rich person, and he's could be very rich. However, in terms of liquid money, he does not have a certain amount of money at this time, and he has to come on to a loan. And again, the Rambam does not put it this way. The Rambam keeps on stressing that the mitzvah says is lahalva is la'aniyah Yisrael, and at the same time gives us a reason why gemilas chesed is greater than tzedakah. But if we look into the Gemara tells us openly that gemilas chesedim is to all, to the rich and to the poor, and it is a mitzvah of gemilas chesed. Talking about this week's Sedra, talking about the Rambam, the Rebbe came to another inyan. The Rambam, another Rambam, which has a shaykhus to this week's Sedra. There's a pasuk in this week's Sedra talking about the Kohen Gadol. Me'im mizbechi tikachenu lamos, which Rashi comments, Mefarshim comment. The Kohen Gadol, we know, min hamikdash lo yetze. You shouldn't leave the Beis Hamikdash. However, there are exceptions. What are the exceptions? Me'im mizbechi tikachenu lamos, which means if there's a case going on by Bezdin, which is involving the killing of a person. Could be a person may be killed. Chas v'shalom. In other words, they're judging a person whether he deserves to be killed or not. And the Kohen Gadol knows something, has some information on this case, which may save this person's life. The halacha is that the Kohen Gadol is supposed to leave whatever he is doing in the Beis HaMikdash, even if he is at the Mizbeach bringing a korban, and go to the Jewish Bezdin and share the information which he has. Perhaps this may save the life of a person. The emes in Gemara, we find, in Gemara and Chazal, we find a further case. This is called Me'im Mizbechi. There's an expression in Mechilta the Rebbe brought, Migag Mizbechi. Gag Mizbechi meaning from the roof of my Mizbeach. What's Pshat, the roof of the Mizbeach? Pshat, the roof of the Mizbeach is, even if he's involved, mamish in being makriv a korban, and it is on Yom Kippur, and there's something which the Kohen Gadol can do to rescue a newborn baby, and a newborn baby, we know al pi halacha, a person's considered a vadai chai once the baby has lived through 30 days. Before 30 days, we don't know if the baby will hold out, if the baby will survive or not. Still, the halacha is that the Kohen Gadol is supposed to stop whatever he is doing in the Beis HaMikdash. Go out of the Beis HaMikdash and go ahead and save the life of a newborn baby. All this is discussed in Gemara. It comes to Rambam. The Rambam doesn't mention this halach. Comes the Mishnah Lamelech, who's a famous commentator on the Rambam. And the Mishnah Lamelech tells us the Rambam does not hold this halach. If the Rambam doesn't quote the halacha, and that where he discusses halachas of Beis HaMikdash, a siman he doesn't hold this halach. The Rebbe says, we cannot say that. How can we say that the Rambam should not hold of such a halach? But Rebbe says the Rambam does not have to repeat halachas more than once. Rambam is a sefer of halachas, and the Rambam spells out everything very, very clearly, and at the same time there's no need for the Rambam to repeat in Yonah. In general, Rebbe says in the halachas of Momenis, we do find that the Rambam mentions many times the expression Kamoshe Yizboyer, Kamoshe Biarti. He does refer to what he already explained. And that perhaps the Rebbe says could be explained based on a ruling of ein Hilchen b'Momein Acha Harav. We do not go according to majority by Momein. So therefore, the Rambam wants to spell out every case clearly. And if the Rambam wouldn't tell us Kamoshe Yizboyer as he explained it in that particular case, on my own, I wouldn't know to compare both of these cases and compare them one to another. But other than rare exceptions, the Rebbe says in Hilchas Ishus, there are some of such exceptions. But in general, the Rambam does not repeat an inyan more than once. The Rambam in Hilchas Yesod HaTorah already tells us the greatness, the great importance of the life of a person. And the Rambam there tells us that we do everything for pikuach nefesh to save the life of a person. And the Rambam even gives the reason why. Because by being over on one aveira now, and through this we are saving the life of a person, that person will be able to do much more than this one mitzvah aveira. He'll be able to do many mitzvahs. The famous expression goes, Chalil of Shabbos achas, on a sick person we are machalil Shabbos once, kedei sheyishmer Shabbos es harbe, because now we will rescue his life, and Mirz Hashem, he will be able to observe many Shabbos. So therefore the Rebbe says we must say that the Rambam also holds this halacha. But being that the Rambam already tells us in Hilchas Yesod HaTorah, the Rambam tells us that we are for pikuach nefesh to save the life of a person, we do everything. So there's no need for the Rambam to repeat in Hilchas Beis HaMikdash that when the Kohen Gadol is involved with a korban, if he has any way at the same time he has to go out and rescue the life of a person, he should drop whatever he is doing and go and rescue the life of the person. We know that. We know that without the Rambam telling it us here, because the Rambam already told it to us in Hilchas Yisodei HaTorah, right away in the beginning, this is in the first Chelek of Rambam. As the Rebbe finished explaining this in where he proves that the Rambam taka holds so la halacha, the Rebbe says, Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is considered a Kohen Gadol. Find this in Chazal. Here the Rebbe says, we know the famous Medrash, Magi devarav liYakov, Chukov v'Mishpativ liYisrael. So Chazal say, based on this pasuk in Tehillim, Masha HaKadosh Baruch Hu oiseh, Masha HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzavel acherim la'asos hu oiseh. Whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do, He Himself adheres to it as well. So therefore the Rebbe says, if now that we have a halacha and a psak din of a halacha, that a Kohen Gadol is supposed to stop whatever he's doing and go out and rescue the life of a person. If we are talking about rescuing the life of a person physically, the same applies to save the life of a person spiritually. The Rebbe says there's no need to elaborate. We know what has happened yesterday and 2 days ago and 3 days ago, what constantly the situation in the world is. Everybody knows. And for those that don't know, he says he doesn't want to elaborate, telling bad news, bad in Yonim. Everybody knows what the rate of mixed marriage is. Everybody knows what the rate of percentage of Yidden that are drifting away from Yiddishkeit is. Well, unfortunately, we know what these numbers are reaching to. And this is an inyan of spiritual death. And therefore the Rebbe says it is the tafkid, the obligation of the Kohen Gadol, who is, in this sense, the Rebbeinu Shalom, to stop whatever he's doing, not wait any longer, not wait till Mashiach will come and then the entire world is going to become perfect and fine. We have no time to wait. It's an emergency. People are constantly dying spiritually. If nothing will be done, as moments go by, there are more and more chalalim falling under the stones. Under what stones? The Rebbe says, under stones of hardened spiritual stones. A stone is a rock. There are unfortunately hearts of people that are hard as a rock. And those people are not softening up, and thereby they are drifting away from Yiddishkeit and having no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit, and reaching to an extent of mixed marriage, Rahman al-Islam, and all the worst. And that is why the Rebishta has to go ahead, just like we find in Halacha, a case where there's a stone which may fall on a person and the stone may kill the person. Here there's a spiritual stone, where a person is hardened up and he's also dying, he's dying spiritually. And this is what the Rebbe is saying. The halacha is that the Kohen Gadol has to stop whatever he's doing. The Rebbeinu Shalom has to stop whatever he's doing and go ahead and put a stop to these high numbers of assimilation, to these high numbers of mixed marriage, and see to it that Yidden should remain as Yidden, and not chas v'shalom, their hearts should be hardened with a leva eden, as the expression goes. On the contrary, hasiroisi is leva eden. The Rebbe should take away these hardened hearts, soften them up, and see that Yidden should act properly as they should. Another inyan which the Rebbe spoke about at the end of the Farbrengen was that today we are benching the month of Adar. By the month of Adar we find what is the famous part of the month. It is naturally the Yontif of Purim. However, in the Megillah we find an expression that not only do we celebrate the day of Purim, Purim had an effect on the entire month. It's v'hachodesh asher nepach lehem miyogan l'simcha. That's what the Megillah uses the expression. The entire month is already a different month. Rebbe says there's a halacha that if a person is going to be in a situation where he will not be able to hear the Megillah on Purim, whatever the case may be, the halacha is that he can read the Megillah any day in the month of Adar. In other words, naturally Mishnah tells us Megillah Nekras, B'yid Aleph, B'yid Beis as of the 11th. But we're talking a situation where one will be in a position, he will not have a Megillah, he will not be able to hear the Megillah on Purim or on the close by days to Purim. So this is what we learn up based on the pasuk v'hachodesh asher nepach lehem miyogan l'simcha, that the entire month became a month of Yontif. Therefore the Rebbe says it is already an appropriate time to remind everybody to see to it, to reach out to as many Yidden as possible regarding the mitzvah of Purim, that Yidden should fulfill the mitzvahs of Purim, all the mitzvahs, Matanis Lav Yonim, Mashloyach Monois, listening to the Megillah, all the mitzvahs which we have to do on Purim, see to it that Yidden fulfill it. And we should reach out to all Yidden wherever we can and tell them about Purim, about the greatness of Purim, and particularly, most important, that they fulfill the mitzvahs of Purim. The Rebbe says in the Megillah we read the pasuk, La Yehudim Haisa Oira V'Simcha V'Sasan V'Yikar. Where does this pasuk originate in the Megillah? And this pasuk became something which we recite every Mitzvah Shabbos Navdalah. And how do we recite it? With a few words afterwards, with the words of Kain Ti Yelanu. And Meila the Rebbe says, now that we are entering the month of Purim, it's an appropriate time to express a wish of La Yehudim, Haisa Oira, V'Simcha, V'Sasan, V'Yikar, and with the conclusion, as we say every Mitzvah Shabbos Navdalah, we say it all year round. How much more so is it appropriate for the month of Adar? And now that we are in the Shabbos of that we benched already Adar, so we already have a shaykhs to Adar. So let it be La Yehudim, Haisa Oira, V'Simcha, V'Sasan, V'Yikar, Kain Ti Yelanu. A good tavach.